Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming to my talk today. A couple of things. I framed this mostly around the notion of democracy in data. I'm logged in there on the schedule as pipelines. I can speak to pipelines. I'm happy to discuss technical aspects of our program. That's not what I'm going to talk about entirely in my presentation, but I can answer questions to that effect as well if you're interested in that kind of stuff. So let's talk about gathering around the data table. And I want to start with the question of how might we use data to improve our democracy? And those of you who may have a user-centered design background may notice that I'm using the how might we, because the reality is we can use data in lots of different ways to improve our democracy. I'm only going to focus on one little thread. I'm not going to talk about big data and dark money in politics. I'm not going to talk about getting out the vote and those sort of traditional uses of data to sort of improve our democracy. There's a lot of folks talking about that. And talk about another aspect of this, which is really about how we can all play a role in having more conversations in our democracy. And so before I start, again, I'm Jason Lally. I am the Open Data Program Manager for our Open Data Program. This is DataSF. I work with our city's Chief Data Officer to operationalize our Open Data Program. And what that means is getting data pipelines out to the public so you can use it, access it, and do interesting things with it. Our mission is to empower use of the city's data. And that is actually really important. We actually take that very seriously because our entire program is built around use of data as opposed to simply the act of publishing. The publishing is important, pipelines are important, but really we're motivated by what people are going to do with it to improve our community. So democracy is important, like I said. We should all vote, but democracy doesn't end at the ballot box. It keeps going. In San Francisco, it happens here. It happens in a lot of other places. This is City Hall. For those of you who haven't had a chance to go, I suggest going. I have the honor to actually work in this building, and it's a very active civic space. Protests, weddings. It's a beautiful building, and there are constant acts of democracy happening here. Sometimes invisible, sometimes visible. But within City Hall and throughout the city, there are hundreds of boards and commissions, or I'm sorry, over 100, not hundreds, but over 100 boards and commissions. There's the Board of Supervisors, the legislative branch. You've got the mayor's office, and then this 50 or so departments. I could show you all that stuff. So what's one to do with all of those choices, all of that activity, right? It's hard to make sense of it. And I'm not going to talk about today making apps to connect to those things, although someone needs to help us with that. There's lots of ways to plug into the city, and it's sometimes very hard to know where to plug in. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit more conceptual, so bear with me. And that's really about what I think is one of the most important tools that any data practitioner, engineer, any practitioner, frankly, can bring to democracy and discourse. Does anyone want to take a guess at what tool that is? What's the most important tool?
Telephone.
Telephone? Is that what you say?
Database.
Database? Twitter? Okay. It's empathy. And so you may think, I know, that was a setup, I'm sorry. So this is actually, it's low cost, it's free, it's something that we can all practice. And you may be wondering, what does empathy have anything to do with data and data pipelines and all this other stuff? Data's rational, right? But really, especially when you talk about bringing data to a conversation or bringing context to an important issue, you really have to understand where other folks are coming from. You have to understand where people are starting from, because they may not be starting from where you're starting from, right? You may have a particular skill or knowledge that someone else doesn't have. And when we're talking about engaging in a conversation and bringing data to that, really starting from a place of empathy is one of the most important tools that you can bring to bear on that. And what does empathy look like? There's three things that I boil this down to, three things to keep in mind in terms of practicing empathy. Because there's some people who are good, just natural empaths, people who are drawn to sort of user-centered design, human-centered design, those types of practices. But it really is something that you can hone and you can really do. You can act on it. And there's three things that I want to point out. You can adopt a beginner's mind. When you're approaching a big data, or not even a big data problem, but any data problem, going in, trying to drop your preconceived notions, really adopting curiosity and questioning the data is really important. And I point this out particularly in this context because I see a lot in the sort of common discourse, people come in with solutions, right? And they say, this data shows that my solution's right. And there's not a lot of questions or what if, and the tone is very different. So I think adopting a beginner's mind is one way to practice empathy. Being transparent. And this is really about methodology, right? So you're doing data work, you're making an assumption, a set of assumptions. Be transparent about what those assumptions are. And invite participation. This is about using language and tone and not being too paternalistic or patronizing. Really putting your work out there that invites participation. I'll show you a couple examples that actually demonstrate this. So this is a blog post done by a gentleman, Lance Martin, PhD down in, I believe, Stanford. We didn't ask him to do this. He just took some data off the portal, and he wanted to look at San Francisco's drug geography. He grabbed all the data from SF Open Data. This is from his blog post. If you read the whole blog post, there's a lot of he's asking questions. He's like, there's a really great tone that's struck in the blog post. And at the bottom, but there's a lot more to look with this data, I invite folks to pull the notebook and explore for themselves. This is transparency. That's what this looks like in the data world, right? All his methods are there. This is in a IPython notebook. It's not, you don't have to use this tool to be transparent, but it's one way to act transparently, particularly when it relates to data. I had the opportunity to go to Code for San Francisco, which is a hack night every Wednesday night, and we participate in collaborative design around key civic challenges. A lot of them involve data. One of the groups there that participates regularly is the Data Science Working Group. They're digging into problems around 311 and locations of fires and predicting fires, and some really interesting data questions that are based on the data that's on the Open Data Portal. We work closely with them. And then there's the Housing Data Hub. This was a product that we built with the brigade and with departments to really try to describe all of the different programs that are happening around housing in San Francisco. Not to try to tell you what we should do, but just to say this is what we are doing, right? So again, empathy, just trying to surface the important data that people were asking questions about so that they could make more informed decisions and start to really look at the data in a different way. And this is a blog post that we wrote that describes that. You should check it out. This describes our sort of approach to building that with the brigade. And coming up, National Day of Civic Hacking. This happens every year. This year, the tagline is "Don't call it a hackathon," and that's very intentional. This year is really about user-centered design. It's really about building empathy for users, government and citizens alike. I suggest you check it out. Come if you can. This will be a great way to, again, put empathy into practice. So, how much time do I have? Okay. So I'm going to really quickly, before I finish up, I'm going to show you a couple things. So I mentioned the Open Data Portal. This is where data ends up. You can go to data.sfgov.org. It's very easy to find. You can Google it. You can explore any number of data sets through categories, through search. You can, if you know the department you want to get data from, you can go there. I'm not going to give you a full rundown of how to use the portal, but I just want to show you, I want to point you in the right direction here. So here's PD incidents, crime data. really popular data set. And under the export tab, not download, unfortunately, but export, you can go to the API. And so there is actually, on every data set where there's a table, you can actually access it. It is not a private data set. It's a public data set. I don't know why I'm getting that. But so generally it shouldn't do that. And if you ever get something like that, you can send a help request, and we'll make sure that you shouldn't be private there. But basically, there's API documentation on every data set that will tell you how to use the data, how to access it. And another thing that we're working on right now, oh, and I should mention it, you can access it in JSON as a CSV as well as GeoJSON if there's geographic information in there. One last thing that we're working on that is I'm going to give you a little preview of, and this is not, this isn't anywhere that you can look at yet, but it will be an open source project. We have a sprint to do yet before we really kind of feel like we can unveil it more formally, or not really formally, but just put it out on GitHub for everyone to access. We're working on, we've heard from our departments that they're not able to really visualize the data. And so we're leveraging those APIs that I just showed you to actually build a comprehensive chart analysis tool that will allow folks to, this is very much in preview, so it's very, very unpolished right now. But so here's eviction notice data. I chose file date, and here it is over time. And I can quickly go and say, I wouldn't actually want to do this. This is supervisor district, by supervisor district. But the main point here is what we're doing is over the next couple weeks, we're going to be doing some user testing with our departments, really understand what kinds of simple charts they want to do. And then we're going to get that out into the world in our open source repository on GitHub. And with that, couple of things you can do that are just very straightforward. Explore data on the Open Data Portal. I just showed you how to do that. Come to a hack night, codeforsanfrancisco.org. This is a link. I'll make sure this gets out to folks. Join us at National Day of Civic Hacking. I showed you where you can get that. Follow us, DataSF, on GitHub. Again, that's a link, so you can get to us, github.com/datasf. And then keep an eye on our blog for more opportunities. So datasf.org/blog. We'll be talking more and more about ways that you can engage with us. So please join us at the data table. We want to create with you so that we can actually improve our democratic discourse. With that, take questions.
Could you talk a little bit about privacy in this context and the kind of issues that you've experienced as trying to do this, and how the city has worked to overcome them?
I love that question because I actually think I have an answer to it. Well, I don't have an answer. But we have an approach. So my team, I should have mentioned this. So we have the chief data officer, who's my boss, Joy Bonaguro. I am one of three other people, and Erica Finkel is our ShareSF program manager, and that's about internal data sharing. She's also focusing on creating a comprehensive sort of privacy framework for open data. So the short answer is this is actually this question is coming up a lot more, and people have not yet are just beginning to grapple with this. And we err on the side of being very cautious until we have a very robust privacy framework and an approach. We're going to actually publish that approach through our blog. We're going to make that a public document. We're working with partners at Harvard and other places to to build that out, and because that is actually, there's a deficit right now around thinking about the interplay between openness and privacy. Particularly, there was a question in the earlier talk about as you get more and more data out there, there are more and more ways you can de-identify things, right? And so what is the risk there? And so we're going to be probably taking there's no such thing as 100% zero risk, rather, I should say. But we're going to be probably taking a risk-based approach to that very question. So it's not there yet, but it's coming. Questions? Other questions? You want to know what stack we're on or anything like that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.